This is Family Like the Ghost, and we're live on the air with Lara Buelow for the first time. Welcome to the Family Like the Ghost podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Want to let people know that we are a featured podcast on the Newsly Network. If you never checked that out, you can use our coupon code GHOST to try it out for 30 days for free. We will be on Newsly later tonight with an audio only version of the podcast. And we also have your URL up there, and people will be able to click on that. So you won't have to remember it, but we do have your URL. There'll be click through as soon as we're published on all the platforms, the way you can view or watch or listen to a podcast. So other than that, I wanted to welcome you to the podcast. And then we do have a question we always ask all of our guests. The first two questions is what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Oh, great questions. What motivates me? Sunshine. Love when it's sunny outside. And then, I think like the abundance and mysteries of the world, like just thinking about all the crazy things that exist, like just really inspire me to like get out of bed and learn something new or like talk to somebody new. So, which leads straight into like why I do what I do, which is I'm a career transition coach and I love connecting with people deeply about what's happening in their life and their career and help them, live with more purpose, passion, impact, right? And really help their work for them. So that's me.
And that's what we'll be talking about, asking what's next for your career and maybe how you can frame that and tell your story of how you got into doing being a professional life designer, career transition coach, and maybe tell your story that brought you to this point.
Okay, great. Yes, I like drank the self-help Kool-Aid from a very young age. I grew up in the Bay Area of California, and the other Kool-Aid that I drank was the love what you do. So I really became obsessed with this idea of like finding a job that I love. And instead of finding that pretty early on in life, it took me many, many years and I bounced around through colleges and a wide variety of careers that I really hated. And so over time, as I was beginning to unearth the two things that I really love the most, which are art, like painting and things like that, and coaching, I, it took me a while to get there. So I was doing all of these like personal and professional development programs. And then as I started getting more and more into the coaching content, people started coming to me asking me how I had made the career transitions that I had made. And I just, I love hearing people's stories. I wonder, like, I'm always like, ooh, podcasts, like so fun to tell my story, but it's also, like I'm like, oh, maybe I'll start my own podcast someday because I think that this is such a great format for connecting with folks. And so that's like what I bring to my coaching is like just really getting into it, really love having one-to-one conversations with people and working with them on what they're struggling in their work. And so that all came to me through like being an artist and then being a coach and like managing a CrossFit gym and just trying on all these different things to see what fit best.
Yeah, it's very hard sometimes because there's a lot of expectations. I think a lot of times people live for other people's expectations or what the people they're trying to satisfy what people think they who they should be
Oh,
rather than be
absolutely.
rather than trying to be who they really actualize, who they are. And a lot of times you come to this kind of critical mass where like other people's expectations and all these things you've been kind of fed or beliefs, but you thought were truths, but they're not. And then you realize like, hey, I'm not happy where I am. And you finally gain like the courage to say, well, maybe I should change that. And a lot of times,
Yeah.
like being an artist, we have this idea like the looking glass self from the romantic poets, where I'm a singer songwriter producer, so I like to kind of dive deep and look at like people, and then either I tell a story about a person I saw in the street or something I witnessed or something internal, and you try to tell that like any author would, and it uncovers things and it starts to get at the vulnerability, like your vulnerability, other people's vulnerabilities, and be able to express that. And a lot of people have a hard time with that kind of vulnerability and being real with it and understanding like are you listening to your soul? Are you listening to your body? Are you listening to your heart? So maybe you can talk about how did you find that it seems like it took us some time, but are there, like, I guess there's steps that you could help other people with as a life designer to maybe get there quicker?
Yeah, you're probably gonna have to ask me the question again because you just hit so many nails on the head, right? Like, I feel like artists really tap into that piece of themselves, that piece of their soul and that vulnerability that feels like it needs to come out and be expressed, right? Otherwise we like wither and die, right? And so, whether it's privately and in the privacy of your own home and you're creating stuff, or if you're like out there on the stage showing your work, right? I think that just creating the work itself is just so therapeutic and essential to staying true to who you are through your creative expression, right? And like, you mentioned vulnerability multiple times. I imagine through your music, your podcast, your producing that you've been able to like meet a lot of people and like draw that out of them and that they're very much drawn to you because of that. So now I'm like trying to think of what your question was again.
Well, I think it's like the process, because I think a lot of people take a lot of time to get to the point where they actually want to self-actualize, and they don't really know how to. They know they need to make a change, and
Yes.
they kind of got to the critical mass moment, or but how can you get somebody to be thoughtful and actually successful at
Yeah.
making that type of structural change in the.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. I mean, I'm very, very privileged in so many different ways. And like one of those ways is that, my parents and my mom specifically was always very supportive of the art that I was making, right? And like that my parents, I think that a lot of young children are told like, "Oh, you can do anything," right? Like go love what you
Mhm.
do and you can be anything. And then the minute you start like getting through college, it's kind of like, "Oh, or even before that, some people are like, "You can't go to college for art. Are you crazy?"
Yeah.
but but this idea of like, so some people start hearing those messages as they approach college, but also like just later in life, it's kind of like, well, you have to go out and you have to make money and you have to look good and status and all of these things. And that becomes like more and more deeply ingrained. So like the fun stuff you get to do in kindergarten is like very much like washed away. And I get a
Mhm.
lot of people coming to me who hate what they do, right? And very much feel like they're using a measuring stick that is not their own, right? And they're following somebody else's script and following somebody else's rules. And I feel very privileged in my life that I've always had people supporting me who said, write your own rules, figure it out. It's all made up
Mhm.
anyway. And so I would say that the way that I integrate that and help people sort of, to your point, like having these people come to me. And I even had a client call earlier where the woman was saying, she was like, "Oh my God,
Looks
I'm
like I lost
50."
your mic for a second.
Oh, shoot. Sorry.
Try your mic again. Seems like I
Is it
lost it.
working? Hello? Test. No? Is it not
I don't know if we
working?
lost our connection, but I can't hear you now.
Oh, I can still hear you. Is it working?
Try to reboot, but go to your
What about
settings
now?
and see if you lost your connection. You maybe go to
Okay.
settings, go to audio, and see if it lost the mic.
Yeah. Oh my God. I think something hit the mute. Sorry. Are you, can you hear me?
Yeah, for some reason, I don't know why it lost it.
Hmm.
Try to see if I can come out.
Is it
You might
working?
want to default to a computer mic if you're using like some kind of headphone mic. Sometimes those lose the connection.
Yeah. Is it working now?
I
Still not
still see
working.
mine's working, but it seems like yours got lost.
Oh,
Let's see
hello. Hello.
what happened.
Can you hear me when I take them out?
Again, if you go to settings, go to audio, go look at your mic and see if that's connected to the mic system that you expect.
Oh, now I can't hear you. Hmm. Gosh, I clearly am experiencing. Can you hear me? Oh, now I can hear you.
Yeah, so I don't know what happened, but somehow StreamYard lost your audio. I was still
Yeah,
seeing my audio come through, but your audio totally. I don't know what
yeah.
happened there. Sorry about that.
No, I'm really sorry about that. My computer has been doing some weird things, so I apologize.
Yeah, I
I'm
was
not
just trying to tell you. There's a yeah. We're using the headphone mics.
Yeah,
Yeah, sometimes those will disconnect in the middle. Like if they lose the connection to StreamYard, then it loses it right in the middle. Like so, we probably should send a note that those headphone mics, if for somehow they're not charged, or there's a blue, or they're low on their charge, then they can just die in the middle, and then they totally screw up their setting. You
yeah,
can't connect. But
doesn't
sorry about that. So we're back and we can hear you. So we'll try to get back to the thought we were on. Um, so we were talking about the whole process of being a life designer and how artists I think are connected to their understanding of like vulnerability. And I think a lot of people think that kind of I don't know. I think it's a kind of process that I call a flow state. I mean, artists are kind of known for the flow state, and they can find that. But I find that flow state exercise is not just for artists. I think anybody can kind of get into a flow state, and if they start to trust themselves, they'll find that they'll actually start going toward the things that they want to do, the
right.
things that they want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, and, my experience too is especially, like, as someone who creates art, I always find that people come to me and go, "Oh, you're so creative." Like, I could never do anything like that. I'm not creative at all. And so, especially my coaching sessions, I always like to tell people, like, everyone's creative, right? Like,
Yeah,
mathematicians are creative. Like,
everybody.
every field requires folks to like brainstorm and open up their minds to consider different. My dad is a scientist, so like, you really got to like be open to discovery when
Yeah.
entering a field. um
Happy accidents. Happy
exactly.
accidents. I mean, a lot of people don't realize, like you said, oh, I'm not creative. Like every day you're walking as a human being, you have your own approach to how you handle the inputs and outputs of the world, right?
Right.
And how you as an individual react to things and how you see things. You design your responses based on like who you are. And
Right.
so everybody approaches something like how they see something, how they see a film, how they hear a song, how they interpret what people say. It's all like very different through different lenses and
Exactly.
different filters. And I think as people kind of sell themselves short when they say they're not creative because
i
every
i agree.
day you are creative and you've got to kind of start owning it or
Yeah.
not being ashamed of it or not being scared of it.
Well, and I feel like society can kind of beat it out of you, so part of the coaching process, in my coaching process anyway, is very much about like reconnecting people to who they actually are, right? Before they started wearing the different masks and paying attention to other people's ideas of what success is, right? And really allowing people to like play and experiment and peel back the layers of themselves to get back to like what makes them feel good, what makes them feel alive, what gets them into that flow state, right? And like really reconnect to like what makes you feel good in a moment and how that energizes you, and you can take that energy to inspire different parts of your life for your work. So that's a huge part of it. Like you mentioned, self actualization. So, no matter what stage of life you're in, I don't think it's ever too late to sort of reimagine and reinvent who you are and how you approach
life, right? And like become an artist at 50, 60, right? Like it's
Yeah.
never too late to incorporate new things into your life and to start experimenting with a different way of living.
Yeah, a lot of times, like, people are in the box, into kind of like in the cubicle kind of mindset, the industrial era kind of, oh, everybody's got to fit within the bell curve. But then business says, they want you to be in the cubicle, but then they want you to be creative. Well, they're being in the cubicle doesn't necessarily mean, really drive like creative people. They kind of drive creative people away.
Yeah.
Because I don't think inside the box. I love to think outside the box. You think about like Einstein, you mentioned like scientists. When they measured him, he didn't do well on his test. His test, he would fail. But he's the
Yeah.
most brilliant mathematician, physicist ever. And that shows you sometimes the things you're measuring with people totally are wrong. The wrong way of measuring whether or not somebody's actually going to be successful. Sometimes all these standardized assessments actually miss a lot of traits of people companies and businesses actually need, but they're
Right.
looking at the wrong people. They're
Right.
looking at
Yeah.
the wrong thing because they don't value that type of creativity, and it's hard to measure. And
Yes.
so it's like sometimes you have to find your own way. And like the great resignation, kind of people start saying, like, you know what? I do want to open that shop on Etsy. I do want to go try, my work in the gallery. I do want to go, try this theater thing and do it, or try something that I didn't think I could do, and
Yeah.
move to a totally different direction. And it's kind of like what your heart's telling you, your soul's telling you, that yeah, you need to get out of the box.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely have to get out of the box. And like, I mean, like write your own rules and then stand by them. I always think with like the great resignation too, it really showed us what was possible. And I'm just so disappointed that all these companies are trying to force people back into these work structures that, people don't want to go back to. And I'm like, don't do it.
Yeah.
Revolt. It's the
Yeah, because they,
revolution.
they 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 kind of forgot. It's like you might own this building, and
Right.
you want to put people back in the building because you own the building, but you were able to get people to do the work without being in that building.
Yeah.
And now you want to get back to that. Oh, you got to put them back in a box. You didn't learn anything? It's like the
Yeah.
problem sometimes is like some of the people like in management, they don't seem to learn the lesson. They want to go back because they tend to be kind of conservative thinkers. They want to be, bottom line thinkers, and like it takes risks. You
Yeah.
have to be a risk taker to be that entrepreneur that
Yeah.
comes out
Exactly.
and creates the business. And then you get these guys that after Henry Ford created the business, and then you have these bean counters run the business.
Mm-hmm.
And then the
Mm-hmm.
passion kind of goes out of the business. And you have to get the people to bring the passion back. So you got to if you get into the 70s, the mid 70s is kind of like the stagnation.
Mm.
Like in Detroit, of like design, it became like really like, oh, what is this? All these green refrigerators, yellow refrigerators, like really boring cars. And you had all these brilliant designs in the 50s, even the beginning. And like, what happened to all the great design? Well, all these actuaries and bean counters came in and said, well, this is what we got to do. And then there was no passion. And then now your passion is coming back, and then you're like, oh, people want individuality. They want to be
Yeah.
able to stand out. They want to have something that makes them feel connected. And it's sometimes it's not just the low cost. Sometimes it's like they're willing to pay more for something that is more connected to them.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking a lot about what you were saying about like the growth and not being able to measure certain things, and there's this great book by Dr. Dweck or something. I forget her name, but she wrote the book Mindset, and she talks a lot about measuring growth mindset in people, which is reminding me of the book Grit, and talking about how do we measure those things and why are we not measuring them? Why are we not teaching those things more, right? Because to your point, like kind of fitting people into these little boxes and like trying to get them to follow all these rules instead of teaching them to be true individual thinkers and have the resilience and the grit to keep pushing and like build these new systems. So I feel like there's just this huge push pull between those two things, right? The old and the new, and this like really getting out of the box and creating the individuality in these certain like products even. But also it's a mindset and like a way of
Yeah.
building connection. So and I try to incorporate that into my coaching as, as much as I can by using different like design tools and exercises to get people to really think about, what's important to them and what does that look like out in the real world.
A lot of times we've been told to, if we have the comparison trap, you're trying to kind of, match the Joneses.
Yes.
Like, where match the person who gets 1 million views. Well, that person gets 1 million views because they're running a cat video, and the cat video is using the 30-second song that everybody's already using. So if you go do that, you get 1 million views, but it's something that everybody's already seen, everybody's already done. Is that really something that you really want to do? Is it really you? Or you're just trying to clone something to get on the train?
Yeah.
And it's harder to be that individual that tries and maybe has missteps or steps on the road on the ladder to get where you go. There's an example with a songwriter. Like, I could have 100 demos of something that never makes it to the public, but I'm running through like all these iterations to get to where I need to be. Like, well, just because I did 50 demos and I didn't really feel it doesn't mean I failed. It's just I didn't actually hear it yet. I didn't hear where I want to go. And so you don't necessarily stop. But a lot of people like stop if they don't get that immediate instant gratification.
Yeah. Staying committed is a lot of work. I think that's something that, again, is part of that like modern push pull too, right? Like with the internet and social media, we're so used to getting those immediate hits, right? And feeling really good about it and getting excited, but it's very shallow and like unsustainable, right? Versus like the things that really matter in our lives take a lot of time, energy, commitment, effort, right? Every relationship you have in your life is going to take time and effort because eventually you're going to get to a sticky point, right? So your career is going to take time and effort. My dad always says that like if you hate your job 40% of the time and love it 60% of the time, like you're already winning like the life lottery, right? I mean, he might have even said it the other way around where it's like you can hate it 60% of the time because like work always has something that you're not going to like, even in the creative field, right? Like there's stuff you're not going to like about it, and that's called work.
It's the work. You got to show up to get to the gig. You might hate being on the bus, being on the train. You might hate being in the studio. You just want to play on the stage, but you have to be in that kind of, I'm in my bedroom studio and I spend a lot of time in the bedroom studio coming up with the thing, right? And then you really want to be on that stage where it takes a lot of work to come up with the art. Right. And so the art, like I love to come up with the art and I love to be on stage, but I understand it's like it's all part of the same thing. And then there's marketing, and the marketing part is probably the hard part I don't like, because that's the part is like I don't want to get into that, but it's like you got to get into it. So like there's always a piece of something that's not preferable, but it's like something necessary.
Right.
So
like how can it work?
It's hard. It's like life isn't always like that 10 step and I'm going to be done. It's like you have to be able to do that for the next till you're done, till you're not here, right? Like if you want to be able, well, people get they get a diet and they say, well, I can do that and get through it, and it's like, well, then it's not sustainable. It's like if you can do that for 6 months, but you got to do that for the next 30 years.
Right.
It's like 6 months doesn't represent the 30 years, right? So if you can't do, if 6 months is the max time you can do it, but that's not sustainable. You need to be able to do something that you can actually repeat and be able to handle it for the next 30 years. And a lot of people they don't see it that way. They're like, oh, well, that's why it doesn't work. Yeah, it doesn't work because you can't stay on it. Like if you can't stay with it, then it's not going to work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's so overwhelming, right? Like that's a huge piece of my work too, is that people get so overwhelmed with how big the whole thing is, right? Whether it's losing a ton of weight, starting a new diet, right? Like switching your career. There's so many steps in between that like one day to forever, right? is like, how am I going to do that? Right. And it makes a lot of sense to me. I experience it all the time of like, oh my God, I'm just so overwhelmed with the amount of work, the amount of things that I have to do. And this is why I really like Have you read James Clear's book, Atomic Habits?
No, I haven't. I think people have told me about it. I probably should read it
Oh my
by
God.
now.
It's so good. So good. Well, and the part that really gets me is that the entire thing, it's not just habits. Like habits can get really dry really fast. Like, how much is there to know, and like kind of boring. Anyway, my point is, what makes the book exciting is that he really creates the link between habits and identity, right? And that's the overwhelming piece. And the exciting, inspiring piece is like, you're not just doing a diet, right? You're not just transitioning in your career. You are building a new identity, right? You are becoming the person who goes on a walk every day. You're becoming the person who has a healthy breakfast, right? You're becoming the vegetarian, whatever. Or like you're becoming the person who now is like willing to do like an industry switch. And that's the piece that's both really inspiring and very big and scary. And so like, what are the little steps along the way that make it feel more sustainable, more approachable?
Yeah, I think the fear is the factor. Like a lot of times people will stay in something that's uncomfortable, but it's known.
Yes.
So they're like in their known uncomfort zone, right? And that is something it's repeatable. They kind of know what's going to happen, but like going and changing to that new industry, going and doing something that's really heartfelt, but that's a risk.
Yeah.
So, but some people is like, well, I gotta be like, oh, I gotta go all or nothing. I could be like starving artist. You don't have to do it that way. You can do it in those steps. So then it becomes sustainable. It's kind of like this podcast. It's not my day job. The day job is a software designer, but I found a way to fit this in with my art, so I don't end up being a starving artist. And I know a lot of artists were like, "Oh, I gotta do it all or nothing." I said, "Well, then what happens? Like, well, then you end up in the nothing. Like, you end up in the nothing zone, and then you're complaining." It's like, well, you have to be a little bit more like, not that you have to plan because people don't like to plan, but you do have to plan.
Well, it's
Yeah,
strategic, right?
yeah, you have to think a certain level. Yeah, you have to have some things kind of like you got to be able to like have a place to live, place to eat, place to sleep.
Yes, you
So
do.
it's like, so you have to at least plan that much out, and then figure out from there like where you fit these other things in that you're passionate about.
Well, and that's another big piece of my work too, which is I found this book that I really love. It's called The Good Enough Job by Simone Stoltzoff. And he was like working as a journalist and then kind of like eventually quit his career and wrote this book, The Good Enough Job. And the piece that I love about it is, like in our current frame of mind and like our society is like, love what you do, and like work should be everything, and work like has consumed our entire identity, and if you don't work 60-hour weeks, like what are you even doing with your life, right? And like we just have a very obsessive work culture in the US. And so he writes about how like, work is work. Like work should be feeding your life, not the other way around.
Yeah. Well,
Right?
people become the job. Like if you like, I become the actuary. So
Yeah.
I'm spending 80 hours doing actuary. I like to play piano when I was 12, and now I can't play it. I
Right.
like to go do tennis, but now I can't do it because I'm paid 80 hours being an actuary.
Yeah.
Is that really what you want to be?
Right.
And you find out you really don't want to do that 80 hours.
Well, and the word is like, hello, boundaries, right? Like work is not everything. Like work should fund your artwork. Work should fund your fitness, right? Like work should allow you to create a healthy lifestyle. I know America is like really hurting with that right now. We won't get into healthcare and all these other things, but like ideally you should have a job that, hopefully you like it and it's good, and like not everybody's going to be obsessed and passionate about what they do, right? Sometimes your work is comfortable and gives you a really good, like an honest paycheck, and it funds the rest of your life, and you do cool stuff on the side. Like, I don't know, but not everybody has to be so obsessed with their life that it like takes over everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have a friend who's an attorney, and he spent all his time being an attorney. Now he's like, in his, I'm 56, he's 57, and now he's like, well, you know what? I really don't like being an attorney.
Send him to me.
It's like I want to play my Les Paul all day. I want to go read poetry. I want to go to coffee shops, but now I have all these responsibilities, all this stuff. So, well, it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Right.
Like it's like look what I'm doing. It's like he was like with me back in the basement when we were 12, 14 years old playing in a garage band.
Yeah, nice.
And he kind of went off to get his law degree, and he still plays guitar, but he didn't find a way to fit it in enough to really make him feel good. But he always feels like he's not able to spend enough time doing his art. And I said, well, you got to create your boundary, like you're saying. It's like you have to create the work-life boundary, right? Like, this is what I'm willing to do. This is what I need to have a baseline. And then you've got to be able to be, kind of clear about that with people. Because people will try to push you to go beyond your boundary, and that's not necessarily in your interest. It's like in their interest.
Yeah.
So you got to figure out how to balance that.
Right. I mean, and that's part of the creative process of being like, you're only gonna, you got to fight for it, like people aren't going to give you that. You got to take it. Like, that is, if you have like a creative project inside of you that needs to come out, you're going to have to fight for it. Right. And like the world and the universe are going to challenge your motivation to do it by putting a bunch of obstacles in the way. Right. Because if you don't really want to do it, that's okay too. Go do something else. Time, right? Like, so I think, and that's a big piece of like the coaching as well, is like finding out what is it that you need, right? Like, what does your friend need? How much time in a week does he need to play guitar, right? Like, or maybe he needs to like line up a show to feel like that rush, right? Of being like, oh, I'm doing this. And like, but it's different for each person. And sometimes it takes like a sounding board and somebody to like move through that creative process with, to figure out, where are the boundaries and how do I hold them? And like, what is it that I truly need to feel more satisfied on a daily basis?
Yeah, because that kind of goes with, I work remotely, and I used to be a road warrior on the plane, Sunday to Thursday, come home and then back on the road. And I decided, like, you know what? I don't want to do that. And because of what I do, I can do it remote. And so if I do it remote, I cut out all of that Uber time, all that plane time, all that hotel time. Now I have time to do what we're doing right now. I carved out the time, and people say, well, how can you do that? I said, well, you just put your foot down and say, I'm a consultant. This is the hours I work. This is what I'm willing to do. And, set yourself up so that works, right? And then you have time to do your art or do your music or to do your photo, do whatever you want to do. But you have to kind of set that boundary. It's like setting a boundary. And I think deciding to set the boundary is probably hard because you've been doing something and it's hard to make that choice. And maybe you have to do a little baby steps to get to it. But, it's like you have to plan it out like anything.
Well, and taking it back to that identity piece, right? Like, you have to build the identity of like, I'm the type of person who has a boundary and is willing to put my foot down, right? I mean, and I don't mean to make this sound easy for people. I want to tell people like, hey, this is really hard. Like, you have to care a lot. Like, I imagine you care a lot about this podcast and your producing of music and all of these things, right? Like, it should mean something to you. Your time on this earth is limited. So, everything that you want to put your time and energy into, like, you should be willing to fight for it, right? You should fight for your time to rest. You should fight for your time to make art and like, take care of your body and all of these things. And that's really hard. I think that the internet kind of convinces us that it's just, like easy and you just kind of turn around and do it. But a lot of the times it's much more difficult for people. And it takes some more of that like mindset work to get to a place where they actually can hold the boundary.
Well, mindset work is probably the hard thing because you get to people who say, well, that's foo-foo and this is that, but I'm a Buddhist, so I kind of into foo-foo anyway. But but the idea, like a lot of us artists, we always like, I'm inspired by the muse. And people are like, what? It's like, well, yeah, I kind of channel things. And the heart of being like an artist, the heart of being like being a singer-songwriter or being a musician, part of the heart of the knowing that you can do it is being able to kind of cut that wall down and actually hear it, right? So you hear the inner and the outer. You can kind of channel. If I sit at my piano, I don't just sit there saying, well, what am I going to do? I kind of feel things. And some of it's like, it's like kind of like waking dreams, stuff that's in my subconscious, stuff that's I heard today, something that's in the back of my head. I heard a show tune, gets put into my thing kind of subconsciously. It's just being able to put that together. Some people have a wall and they've been told like I can't even do that at all. So they
Yeah.
stop themselves and they can't even do it. They look at it and say, I can't play the keys. I can't play the guitar. I can't paint. I can't be a photographer. I can't be an actor. So they
Mhm.
just say can't. So you're never going to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of negative self-talk. I mean, it takes a lot of work, right? Like, I'm not immune to that. I've got my own like chatterbox brain going on. So, it's like, that's another one of those things. It's just a daily practice of like giving yourself permission, right? And to like accept that new identity and to build it. It's a hard one. I mean, I feel like that's kind of the whole like meaning of life, really. Is to like go out and live your own life on your own terms and like figure out, who are you? Why are you here?
But it seems like there's a lot of shame and guilt that people are kind of put on. Because like if you're a kid and you're get in that dream kind of state, you're like 5, 7 years old. Yeah, I can be president. Yeah, I could be like Hendrix. I could be. Then people start saying like, no, you're not. Yeah, you're 14, 17, 18. It's like, well, no, you're not really gonna do that. What you need to do now. And so what happens is like you lose that kind of childlike curiosity.
Yes.
Because it kind of gets knocked out of you. Because people start disappointing you, or you get disappointed, you don't get to actualize because people tell you shouldn't. And it's like it's shameful to want to be an artist because that's selfish. You need to be more responsible. That you're being a kid, you're being childlike. A lot of the people I hang around with, we're in their 50s, and people say, "You guys seem kind of immature or childlike." Like, well, that's kind of nature of being an artist. That we're a little bit immature. We kind of stay that way. Because to be able to think that we have the right to do that, we have to have some gumption. And some
Right.
people might get put, put upon like, oh, there's like you're arrogant. It's like, well, you have to have something to believe that you can actually be on stage, that
Yeah.
believe that you can present that. And I don't know, I don't think it's arrogance. I think it's like I know what I want to do. And
Right.
I'm not scared of showing you. And you might think that's arrogant to show you because they think I should just keep it to myself. Well, that's your thing. You think I should keep it to myself. It's like, well, that's your kind of hang up. It's not mine.
Well, and also like I think a lot of artists, myself included, like are afraid to show their work. And the difference is, right, like that gives you the opportunity to be brave, right? To be like, yeah, I'm scared, but I'm going to do it anyway, right? Like, oh, I don't know, like I'm nervous about getting on the stage, but I'm going to do it because I have to, right? Like that's why
stage fright. Like everybody gets the stage fright, but they get beyond it. The thing is, the artist that shows up on the stage, they found a way to get past it. They still get it. I know guys that get it every night. Even though they do it, they still got it. And they found a way to get through it, but they still get it.
Yeah. And that's why Brene Brown always talks about like the people who are in the arena, right? The people who are scared, but they go out and do the work because that's what they're being called to do, right? They get on the podcast, they get on the stage, they show people their work, right? They produce art and share it with people because that's what they have to do. I mean, and I'm like a deep believer of that, like that's what humans are here to do, is they're here to create weird stuff and show it to other people.
Yeah, well, that's how we make progress. Because if everybody just said, well, the wheel was invented, let's keep on just doing that.
Right.
Well, you're like, well, you need to think, somebody had to come up with something else.
Right.
They're like, oh, the axle, the car, the motors. It's like the people didn't just take it; they took it and they said, well, maybe what could we do with that? It's like it's not just enough just to have it. But some people feel like I can't even presume to go into that arena of the creative. That's meant for other type of people, and they put them on these pedestals and they act like you can never even reach it. And there's all kinds of degrees of where you could be in that. And I think it's having the permission.
Yes.
Giving yourself the permission. Because sometimes people say, well, the other people aren't letting me do it. It's like, well, most of the time it's you that aren't letting you do it.
Right. Well, and that's why creating art is like such a practice in like self-actualization and in self-compassion, right? Like you have to allow yourself to make mistakes and to like feel embarrassed or scared in order to share your work, or even maybe in this case, like to make it in the first place. So art is like such a great platform to allow people to tap into their creativity and kind of fumble through all of the insecurities, right? And the lack of permission to practice that like self-compassion of like, no, I'm worth it. I'm worth it to have the time to make like some little crafty thing and then like share it with a friend. right? So because
Yeah.
like what I'm hearing you talk about is say like, no, I'm like worth it. I'm worth the time and the attention to put my work out there.
Because once you put something out there, it's like the law of attraction. And
Mm,
so you could end up like losing friends because they say, well, I didn't think that, I didn't know that about you. But then you gain other people. So it's every time you put something out there that's kind of yourself, you do run the risk of that vulnerability, somebody not reading that right? So somebody thought they knew you, but
mm-hmm,
then you put this thing out and you're like, whoa, that's a bridge too far for me. So then you might lose them, but then you gain these other people. Some
mm-hmm,
people are scared of losing or getting the hate response or the bad response, or I don't get it. But when you put it into the world, then you find other people who have like minds, and then it starts to happen. That's what happened with a lot of what I'm doing is just showing up has created opportunities, and
yeah, exactly.
being consistent. Then people know that, oh, this is what he does,
Mm-hmm,
and then
mm-hmm.
people come to you and they say, oh, I want you to produce this because I know this is your style, and you get opportunities. You might not be the biggest person in the world, but people see what you do and they say, well, I kind of like what you do. I want you to help me with this.
Yeah.
And then that's what breeds like, oh, wow, I can actually do this. There are other people that get it, but no
Mm-hmm.
one's ever going to know that if you don't put it out there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're making me feel both like very hopeful and scared at the same time because I'm like publishing my first book. And there's definitely part of me that, because it's very different for me personally than painting, right? Like when I paint, I'm like, oh, okay, great. Like I'm very excited to show my work. Whereas like with writing, it's a very, it's a totally different medium. and
Yeah,
it feels much more like intellectual property to be judged on than than just like making.
yeah. There's a whole different group of people that measure. Yeah, it's
Yes.
like everything, and like every canon has these measurements.
Yeah.
And you go into the writing camp, you go like Shakespeare, you have this, you have these people. And it's like, if I dare go in this arena, people are going to go slap you down, put the red marks all over it, and say, what are you doing? Like, why are
Exactly.
you here? But everybody's got to start, and there's a lot of innovators like in music. When Hendrix did what he did, people don't know. It's like he used to play with like Little Richard. He used to play with the Isley Brothers. He used to be on what they call the Chitlin circuit in the early 60s, 65, 64. He was playing with all these big soul acts, and he would kind of sneak some of his Hendrixian sound, and it was really weird. And people would say, "Well, you can't put that on my Little Richard record.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound right on a Little Richard record." And he kind of tried to sneak it in, and he'd get fired. But he was trying to get it on record so people could hear it, and then start to pick them. And his strategy eventually worked because somebody in England, the Animals, heard that, and they said, "That's amazing." So he'd bring him to England, and then he got big.
Hmm.
Suddenly, in '66, he got brought in by somebody from the Animals, like a guy named Chad Chandler, the member of the band The Animals, heard what he was doing and said, wow, I never heard that before. But because he had the guts to kind of put that out, even when people told him not to,
Yeah.
he still did. And eventually somebody heard it and said, that's really unique. I think more people need to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of, it's like, so sometimes you're not in '66, nobody, they thought, like, what is this? Little
Right.
Richard said it wasn't even good. A lot of
Yeah.
people, like, if a guy like Little Richard tells you you're not good, you might stop, but
I
he
probably
didn't
would.
stop. He didn't stop.
Yeah.
And so
I mean, that's
people,
the resilience piece, right? Like the like how many times are you going to get up again? Because you really have to be willing to hear a lot of no's.
yeah, a guy like that is a big mentor to a lot of people. And if he kind of cuts you down, you're like, oh man, what am I doing? Am I even in the right place? But sometimes you just gotta have that kind of spirit. It's like, I know that this sound is something that should be heard.
Yeah.
And you might be the only one that's your own advocate for at the beginning.
Right.
And then
Well, and
eventually, like if you feel it, that other people will start to feel it.
yeah, and like that whole idea of like making for making's sake, right? Like art for art's sake. Like, just being like, I want to make art. This is the kind of art that I'm making, right? Jimi Hendrix, like that's his sound. And that's how he knows how to make art. And that feels like a unique expression to him. So it's like, what else are you going to do? Like you have to, when you're called to make something, you got to get up and be like, okay, well, I'm making this and it feels good to make it. So
Yeah, they're calling. Yeah, I mean, it's hard because there's so many people are like into this, today with all the computers. It's like, oh, if the computer tells me that I don't have enough likes, then I'm not making it. Like I don't got, I got 5 likes. This other guy got a million views, a million likes. So I must be like nothing. But I've heard stories in the music industry where somebody put something out, there's only 100 views, but a big producer heard it and
mm,
said, wow, that's amazing. And then they contacted that person and they actually got big.
yeah,
So
wow.
the number of views, the number of likes isn't representative of like the real truth. The real truth is like you should believe in yourself. If you believe in yourself, that's a lot of the work. Because
Yeah,
if you keep on showing up, then you're gonna get better. Like
right.
every day you get better. Every day you present, and then eventually you'll be on a stage somewhere doing whatever you want to do.
Yeah. And I mean, like, and some people don't even have the goal of getting on the stage. And I think that that kind of speaks to, like this idea of like, well, what if Hendrix never got famous? Like, there's so many painters in like the history of art that
Yeah,
like, they never made it anywhere. They were starving artists, right? They were like
yeah.
sad,
People
depressed,
find
starving
them later.
artists. And then now their works are going for millions, right? It's just like,
Well, like William Blake, the famous poet, he was not known in his time. The
mhm,
William Blake Tiger, Fearful Night Cemetery, one of the greatest Victorian poets, was not known in the Victorian age. He was known after.
yeah.
So and he had the gumption to actually take his poems and write them in acid metal plates with, and then people found them in a barn.
He was like,
And
I
then he was
live alone.
then and then because he had that idea, it's like it should be eternal because it's good. He thought it was good enough to do that, so it wasn't just a piece of paper. They found it and they said, "Wow, this stuff's amazing." And then he got known to be one of the greatest Victorian poets. But out of his time, in his time, he wasn't known. So that
Right.
kind of tells you, like put it down, because like even future generations might benefit from what you're saying. So
Right.
it doesn't always have to be sequential on your timeline. Because
And
we're human beings, we want to be, known in our time, but it doesn't always work out
we
that way.
do, especially in the age of social media. I mean, again, like I can even see it in myself. I think social media, like it really messes with my brain. So I imagine it messes with other people's brains in the sense of like, it can be kind of a measurement of like, why are you doing the work, right? Because if you're doing the work for the likes, then, maybe sit with that for a minute because that shouldn't really be the truest motivation for why you're doing the work, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
where's the impact? Where's the value? How are you helping people or the world like grow and expand versus just like whatever the algorithm
Because
wants
there's a
to
lot of things that people, yeah, there's a lot of times where like, there are people who do things in the arts and then people find it like later. Like, big examples like Lou Reed in the Velvet Underground.
do. Hmm.
Everybody that heard them ended up being like a producer. They
Mm,
were not commercially successful from like 66 to 70. But the people that heard them were producers like David Bowie. David
mm,
Bowie heard the early Velvet stuff. He thought it was great. He incorporated it in his sound, in the way that
mhm.
he presented himself. And then later he worked with Lou Reed and they put out Walk on the Wild Side. Then Lou Reed blew up because somebody that was inspired by him, Bowie, actually produced that record. And then Lou Reed got the recognition that he hadn't been getting
Yeah.
because a
Yeah.
fan
Creative.
actually recognized him because he put it out there.
Yeah, I mean, creative collaboration is key, right? Like nobody does anything alone. Like you gotta have friends, you gotta have your network, you gotta have your support community, your fans, right? Like nobody does anything in a vacuum. Like the creative collaboration and those partnerships can be game changers.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like he wasn't, that wasn't a commercially successful record, but somehow Bowie got one of those records from '66 of the Velvets and heard Lou Reed and thought it was like the best thing he ever heard.
Yeah,
So
it's
like
great.
again, it's like just because you're not commercially successful, it depends on who heard you. If a
Hmm.
guy like John Lennon or Bowie heard you, then sometimes you end up getting to work with them and you might not have been that big, but they
Yeah.
found that you were important to them. And
Hmm.
so so that's kind of like the law of attraction. And if you say, well, I'm not good enough, I'm not even going to put it out.
Yeah.
then you
Yeah.
never even find out. Like, so sometimes, the way the world is, people find some nugget and it's like, wow, this chapter, what you said here, or this line you said here, or this way that drew this line on a drawing, or something clicks with somebody. Somebody
Yeah.
gets like a trigger and it's like, yeah, that's awesome. And
Mhm.
then you start to get to the people around you, like a collective
Yeah.
of other artists that start to recognize, wow, you're onto something here.
Right.
And then you word of mouth.
Yeah. Well, and what you're saying like makes me think of just this idea that like maybe a healthier, smaller scale way of thinking about impact is like, and I ask myself this question a lot is, okay, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, like if putting my work out into the world, whether it's a painting or this book that I'm writing, like whatever it is, an Instagram post, a newsletter, if putting this out in the world might help one person,
Yeah.
should I do it? Right? Like, should I share this? If I could just touch one other person and connect with them and help them through whatever I'm sharing, then maybe I should, right? Like if one person hears this podcast, like how will that impact their life? So
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is that people are always looking for the big number. Like in the podcast world, most podcasts fail after 12 episodes if people don't hit the metrics that they were looking for.
mm,
I've been doing this since 2016, and this episode is actually at like 1078. Like we're number 1078. So if I had, after first 12 episodes, I probably didn't know what I was doing, and I just kept on doing it,
yeah,
And so, but over time, you get better. It's kind of
right.
like showing up. You do something 1,000 times to get that muscle memory. And so I found a way to connect with an audience and over time, but it wasn't something that happened overnight.
Or in
Since
12 sessions.
2016. Yeah, well, you just do it because like I didn't really care about the naysayers at the time. I was just going to do it until I felt I got a groove. And once I
Yeah.
got the groove, I don't know which episode I felt like I got the groove on, if it was number 100 or 200 or whatever. But like once I feel, it's like kind of like I'm a musician. Like I said, we write tons of songs that nobody hears. I kind of treat it like that. It's like I'm going to keep on working on it. It's like a demo,
Yeah.
And if I take that same effort, I know I can do it. And so this idea is like is practice makes perfect. Showing up is a lot of it, and if you can do that, then you'll find that things don't happen necessarily overnight, but you can, if you feel good about what you're doing. Like you don't do this if you don't feel good about it. Like
Right.
you keep on doing it because you're just like, what? Diminishing returns.
Yeah. Well, and a part of it too, I always think is like part of the reason to keep going even when it gets hard is that there's something incredibly satisfying about having a body of work down the road, right? Like all of a sudden you have such a large volume that you can edit that like grouping into something that like is really very cohesive, right? All of a sudden you have an album, you have a book, you have like a whole body of work of your paintings. And I think that piece is just so rewarding, but it takes a lot of work to get there. But that is an impressive number of episodes.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, with the backlog that a lot of artists have. I've run into tons of painters that go to their loft and it's like tons of paintings and like, well, how many of them are in galleries? Well, maybe like 2% of what's here. And like it's like, well, some of this stuff look like all of it could go to the gallery, but I don't know. I'm not the gallery guy. But like, yeah, sometimes it's like you get amazed about what artists like hold back. And what I've been doing recently, I've been talking to a lot of people that because of the net, you can kind of put things out there in a big space, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't know. Like a lot of artists I've talked to is like the thing they picked to put out isn't actually the thing that their fans would want. That people later find that the stuff they held back is what they really wanted. So sometimes you're not the best judge of your own stuff, and so that times it tells you maybe you need to talk to other artists or other people that kind of help curate your work.
Yeah, you got to get out there, get more input. I mean, yeah, we are in like a really special time in that sense of like the internet is making remote work possible, right? It's allowing artists from all over the world, little towns to big cities, to like provide a space for their work to get out to like so many people. You mentioned your friend who, you know, the right person heard it, right? It only had like 10 likes or whatever, but the right person heard it and they ended up getting produced. Like that's always wild to me, the people who you know, like they're in front of the right audience at the right time. Like that is a very special moment.
Yeah, now that happens on the net. Well, people thought you had to be at the Whiskey A Go Go, or you had to be, at some famous club, like in New York or something. It's like now if you actually show up, there are situations where you don't know who's listening to you or who's looking at your stuff, and sometimes people are honestly out there checking things out, and
Yeah.
and people get connected, and it's really interesting how that happens. But it's just so it's always kind of a lesson learned that you should kind of not be as critical of yourself as you are. A lot of people are kind of down on themselves, and
Yeah, very
try to be
common.
less down on yourself.
That's right. Yeah, I totally agree. I work on that like with a lot of people because so many people are really, really hard on themselves. It's a hard pattern to break, right? And that gets back into that like identity cycle of habits and how you're talking to yourself. So it's a tough one.
So what I like to do, as I know we're getting close to the hour, but a lot of times I like to ask people some core questions about like over time. But are there 3 key lessons that the audience can take away from what you're doing with your work that you've maybe could kind of distill to like 3 key lessons learned?
Okay, let me see. Let me see if I can do this. 3 key lessons. I'd say mindset is everything, right? So really working on that mindset and being nice to yourself would be my first one. Number 2, get support. Nobody does anything alone. So whether it's your mom, your cat, your friend, whoever, a coach, right? Like find a support system in becoming the person that you want to be and doing the things that you want to do. So mindset, support, and I guess the third one I'll say is like stay curious. Like just keep asking questions, never stop learning.
Those are great things. I think a lot of times I like to hear the wisdom of my guests to get them on the spot to kind of put that out. But I think what you just said is real important, because that's very helpful to, I think, a lot of people in the audience when they hear what people have to say. And so that's why I like to give this platform to people. But again, we do have your link out there that everybody can click, and maybe you can tell people what happens if they click on your link.
So on this particular link, this takes you straight to my website to book a time to talk. Like I offer free clarity sessions where we get together for an hour and you basically just get to like tell me your whole life story and or just a little bit about the career transition that you're looking for. But basically anybody can sign up for that call, and I'm going to recommend resources and help you figure out exactly what the next step is for you for after we get off the call. And I always recommend like a bunch of free resources to people to help them on their journey. So that's what this particular link is. And the one that I really want to highlight is the one for my book that's coming out, Mostly Unanswerable Questions, which is also a tab on my website. And you can sign up for the book launch team there, and it is coming soon. It is not published yet, but it is coming soon. And I'm very excited because it allows you to kind of like take everything we've covered in this podcast and then like apply it to yourself and kind of coach yourself to the next best thing.
Well, that's great. So everybody can get to that kind of like your website. You'll be able to get to that other link for your book, which will be out soon.
Yep.
So that's always cool. And we would like to have people come back on our show when they have something important to show. So in the future, like when your book release, if you want to come do a book release show.
I would love to. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, because we did have our technical little difficulties, so I'll give you another show.
Oh, great.
But thank you again for being a guest on the Family Like the Ghost podcast. It's always awesome to talk to people. We appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. And again, people will be able to check this out on all the platforms that podcasts can be listened to or watched. And so thank you again for being on the show tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. Really honored to be here. Thank you.
Have a good night.